tear it apart and could destroy your career, you have every right to know who that is and to respond to it. And so I think one of the first things that is absolutely essential, goes back to Gavin's question about how do we change it, is that you disclose who the reviewers are. I don't think I have any right to write negative things about anybody or their work without that person knowing who I am. And if I'm not prepared to know them to know, then I shouldn't be saying it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The lack of transparency is a problem.
Part is unacceptable.
The lack of transparency in the review process is integral to its corruption of science, of information, of discovery. So the first thing out the gate is the transparency has to change. It has to be available.
Yes, and by the way, just to sort of carry that idea on a bit, because it wasn't just in peer review that I saw this incestuousness developing, but it also occurred in funding. So if you applied for funding for a project, and let's say Gavin was in a position where he needed to get some funding to do his book, then the request for funding was sent out to peer review, if you want. Should we fund this?
Yes.
And of course, when I sat on committees that were looking at requests for funding, you knew who was asking for the funding because of the way that they asked for it and the way it was done. So there was also control of the publication or the actual beginning of the research, even before you got to the publishing level, by controlling who got the funding and who didn't. So this peer review goes beyond just the publication part of it.
I must say, what I don't understand, Tim, is why people are prepared to fund such very narrow areas of research, which they seem to be. I mean, when you can write a book and get all the money you want through sales, which you can use to research more. I mean, I'm baffled by how people go about getting money to fund their historical research. Why people are prepared to put money up?
Well, of course, this is another part of the problem, because most of the money that goes to academic research is now coming from government, and that's been set up by these group of intellectuals who say that we must continue to fund this work. And of course, the counter argument is that if you let it become commercial, that somehow then is more corrupting than doing it through government. But what we're finding out is that that's not the case at all, that the funding that's done through the marketplace is a much more rigorous and demanding measure of what has application and validity and interest to the society as a whole. So the funding issue, by the way, and here's a measure of what's been going on, Gavin, is that it used to be publish or perish. Now it's get funding or perish. Yes. You are more promoted in universities in the academic system based upon the amount of money that you're bringing in through these funding sources than you are from what you're publishing. Yes. And so I think that's part of the explanation for it.
Well, one thing perhaps I could say is a sort of encouragement to people not to get too worked up about what people say in peer review. My experience has been that the public are really quite astute, in fact, extremely astute, and not that influenced by what other historians say. So, for example, when my first book, 1421, came out, it didn't sell particularly well to start with, and we were told that there was a famous historian going to be writing for a well-known UK paper, and he would give us a terrific chuck-up and say how wonderful my book was, and etc. Well, his review came out, and it was absolutely savage. He just ripped me to shreds, and then sales took off. So you can't tell what's going to happen.
Well, that's great. That's great.
And by the way, I completely agree with you about the astuteness of the general public. One of the things that has kept me going through all of the nasty attacks and so on, and by the way, the worst were from academics, was this huge well of common sense in the ordinary people.
Yes.
and they're always accused of being slow and not perceptive and so on. But of course, their experience comes from having been gulled and conned before, and so they sit back and wait till a much larger picture is out there. And the most common comment I get after a presentation is, "I had my suspicions, but I didn't know enough to know."
Yeah.
So it's not that they're necessarily not having a view, they're just not prepared to express it because they know they're going to be savagely attacked if there's any error in it.
Gavin, how did you generate your initial funding to do your research? If you would be comfortable to share how that came about, I think a lot of people would be interested to know, just as an example.
Well, I was incredibly lucky in that I came across what I thought was a story. When I was in China with my wife, we came across a story that the Emperor of China had sent a huge fleet around the world to bring everyone back to the Forbidden City in Beijing in 1421 for its inauguration. I decided to write a book about the year 1421 in China and Europe, and that I took 10 years research in doing it, and then I managed to sell it to a small but reputable publisher, and he sent the book out for review, and one of the people who reviewed it said, did I know about a map which showed the Caribbean, which had been published in 1421, and I went and had a look at this map, and I could see it was the island of Puerto Rico and Guadalupe, appeared accurately drawn 70 years before Columbus. So that really completely changed my whole life. I realized there were maps of places accurately drawn before European voyages exploration started. So I then looked into Magellan, Cabral, Diaz, da Gama, see whether they had maps. And I found that all, by complete chance, I found over a 6-week period, by examining their records, that every single European explorer who set sail for the New World had a map of the place before he set off. And so I was just unbelievably lucky to stumble on that. And I found a publisher, Transworld, who really had guts, and they were convinced what I said was true. And they decided to publish and be damned, and that's how it all started.
That's amazing. And one of the things I wanted to share about my experience of you, Gavin, is that you empower other people, even if they find information or have discoveries that go beyond the year 1421. I thought that the work of Charlotte Harris Rees in Secret Maps of the Ancient World, and your advocating her and that groundwork, is amazing and so unusual for the realm of discovery. Most people would try to hide that information. I think it was incredible of you.
You're very kind to say so, but I think just to put that in context, Charlotte Harris Rees inherited her father was a missionary in China, and she inherited his maps, which were very old Chinese maps of the Americas going back to 200 or 300 BC. So she showed me these maps at the Library of Congress where they were on loan to, and I went and had a look, and I was absolutely amazed. It showed that the Chinese had been sailing backwards and forwards to the Americas for 2,300 years. So I thought it was just a very interesting story, and sure enough, she managed to find a publisher, and I think her book sold jolly well.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's the opposite of how a lot of discoveries are received. If that were in a purely academic circle, it would be vilified, it would be thrown out, because it goes even further to reinforce the fact that it wasn't Columbus who discovered America, but that it's even thousands of years before 1421. And so what you're doing, it's really a great adventure.
Oh, it's an amazing, I mean, as I say, at the Royal Geographical Society last Friday, Emeritus Professor Carl Johannesson and John Sorensen talked about their books, and their books describe multiple voyages between the Old World and the New, sailing from the Old World to the Americas right back to 7000 BC. I mean, it's just been thousands and thousands of voyages before Columbus, which is why I think the whole Columbus story is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, Gavin, before we came on the air, I mentioned to you that one of the books that had a great influence on me was Thor Heyerdahl's book.
Yes.
Not the Kon-Tiki.